Thanks. Good morning, everybody, or happy brunch time. Um, my name is Tiara Brown, and this is my partner, Eleni Bird. We are a part of the Include Me program in the Lehigh Valley, and we are super excited to be here with you guys and talk about sensory integration and processing issues. Um, Eleni, if you want to go through, I just want to say that our training is a safe space and there are no bad questions. So if you have a question, we are totally cool with you coming off of mute and asking the question or even putting it in the chat. So feel free to share your questions or ideas because we are a learning community together. And so we want to hear, you guys have had the experience too, so we want to hear what you have to say. Another housekeeping, we know that you guys are adults. So if you need to stretch, if you need to fidget, if you need to go to the restroom, do whatever you need to take care of your needs. We are all here in the same issue. So if you see me kind of throwing stuff around, I'm a putty person. It helps with my anxiety. So if you just see me fiddling and stuff, that's what we're doing. And please take care of your needs. As I said, my name is Tiara Brown. I'm actually from Virginia. Oh, if you want to put in the chat your name, if you're a parent or a professional, and from the scale on the scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable you are with sensory processing in this subject. So I'm going to put that in the chat. But I am from Virginia, from Norfolk, Virginia, which is around Virginia Beach. I've been in PA for 5 years. I have a bachelor's in psychology. I would love to go back to school, but Uncle Sam does not want to pay for my student loan, so I have to wait until he gives me some more money to do that. I've worked as a DSP with adults who identify with IDD, and I've also worked in foster care with foster youth for a couple of years. Some fun things is I'm a plant mom. I love plants. I could garden. I wish I could garden, but I live in an apartment, so that's really hard. But I love to garden. I'm a nerd. I like to go to Ren fairs and Comic Cons. And my favorite place in the world is Niagara Falls on the Canada side, not the New York side, because you have a better view. But I'm gonna let Eleni introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Tiara. So this is me. I'm Eleni Bird. I am from the Lehigh Valley. I've been here forever, and I'll probably never leave. My roots are deep here. um, and that's my email in case you ever want to contact me. A little bit about my background. I have 16 years of community organizing and nonprofit leadership. So I love working in the community and building those bridges between everyone. It's my jam. It always has been. And also, I have 12 years as a paraprofessional, and then I was also a direct support professional / program specialist. So we spent a lot of time in the residential world, wore a lot of different hats through that time. I am so glad to be coming back to the classroom and be able to, support in that way. And I have a 10-year-old that I just happen to think is like the coolest kid in the world. He was watching me kind of work on this a little bit last night to just review and make sure I was prepared. And I think he learned a lot about his own sensory processing processes and things like that. So it was a good full circle moment for us. So should we dig in?
Yes.
Let's do it.
We have some learning outcomes just because we do. We want to let you know what you're learning. So we're going to define sensory systems. We're going to utilize strategies to support the sensory system. We're also going to recognize sensory process disorders and distinguish sensory seeking behaviors. Also, we're going to have a few activities and places where we want to hear from you. So we're going to ask you some questions. If you feel I would confident all the above. If you feel safe of coming off mute and saying them out loud, we encourage that, or you can put it in the chat. But we just want to make it interactive because we want to know your thoughts about things. And also, again, we want to learn from you. So Eleni is gonna start. She's gonna take it. for it.
All right. So sensory processing, let's dig in. So, when we're young in kindergarten, we all learn about our five senses, our sight, our hearing, smell, taste, and touch. That's kind of the package we're given very, very early on in this life. And we know it's a little bit more complicated than that. So we're going to dig into that soon. But let's just have a shared definition real quick before we go further. So sensory processing is receiving those sensations of touch, movement, sight, sound from your body and the environment and responding in a well-regulated way. So it's that ability to organize all of that sensory information for use in everyday life. So it's not just the senses, but it's also how we use all of that information. So sensory processing is much, much more than, just what we're bringing in. So this is linked to, everything that we do in life. So how we intake and process that information is how we learn about our world and respond to it. So it affects how we move in balance. It affects how we learn, how we behave, how we interact with others, and every other aspect of our daily life. All right, so why is it important? So when a newborn is born, they can usually see, hear, sense their body, but they're unable to organize these senses, and that information means very little to them. So there's that learning curve. So we can sense things, but we're not able to process them yet. So when children learn to register and interpret the sensory information throughout development, we see that appropriate responses to the environment. So children can sit and attend to important pieces of information, whether it's in the classroom or a different environment. They are able to, get that skill mastery as well, whether it's a functional skill that we're seeing in the home and community, or if it's something classroom based. Oops, sorry. I'm always so distractible by the chat. So if I just start talking all of a sudden, I'll be like, wait, is there a question? All right. So we see that, the child is able to, or student is able to understand their body's movement in relation to their surroundings and themselves. So that's a lot of that self-regulation, behaviors, and being able to pay attention. So that's allowing us to be able to be involved in more of those whole body activities. And we know that aids in social development. That's something that there's a lot of research behind. All right, so now that we've talked about sensory processing as like a big idea, let's dig into some of these systems that are beyond those basic five that were given at a very young age. So we know that the text might be a little tiny, so we're going to go into more detail as we go, but let's just talk about the systems as a whole. So we have our auditory system, which is, that hearing and listening. We have the tactile system, which is touch. We have that olfactory system, which is smell, which I always remember olfactory because old factories smell terrible. So I just take off the D and I remember olfactory. Then we have gustatory, which is taste. And then we have visual, which is, anything that is with our vision, our eyes. So those are kind of our beginner five that we talked about before, but you'll see that there's three additional ones that are listed on this slide that are of the utmost importance. And we're going to talk about those a lot today. So the first one is proprioception. So proprioception is all about knowing where we are in space. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go. Vestibular is all about balance and our relationship to gravity, which I have been through vestibular therapy many times in my life because I am a wobbly one. And I don't always get along with gravity very well, but here we are. A lot of people don't realize how much of an anchor the vestibular system is to our entire sensory experience. So, and last on this list that we're just kind of grazing through is interoception. So interoception is being able to detect and interpret all of those sensations that are going inside our body. So hunger, thirst, maybe a little bit of an upset stomach, like nausea or some other gastro issues, heart rate, breathing. So a lot of those bodily sensations that really inform many different parts of our experience, from creating anxiety to taking care of our basic needs. So these are our core 8 that we're going to go into a little bit more detail with. All right, so let's start out with the auditory system. So the auditory system is one of the body's most complex and delicate sensory systems, which we'll also talk about this a little bit later with another system. So dysfunction within that sensing of the auditory system can be connected to the structures in the ear, and more often it's connected to the parts of the brain that interpret sound. So it allows us to know the difference between background and foreground noise. It allows us to also understand and react appropriately to the sounds in our environment, especially to keep us safe. So we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get back to the vestibular system. So I'm sure you've heard a lot about the inner ear and a lot of the functions of that. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But you know what? That's fine. We can keep on moving. I wasn't quite ready to scroll, but we're here anyway. So we're going to do a little bit of an auditory activity that mimics what the experience is like. So hopefully I've shared my sound correctly. If not, someone please come off mute and let me know, and we'll get it fixed right away. So before I start the video, everything in the video is intentional. So most of the video is silent until instructed to put on headphones. Granted, we aren't going to have headphones available, so we're just going to do the best we can with the sound that we have. So if you're interested in experiencing this at like another time with headphones on, controlled setting, I will share that link in the chat so that you can do that at your, at your convenience. But in the meantime, we're going to do the best we can together. So this is a simulation, or this simulation is designed to exaggerate the frustrations someone with auditory processing disorder may go through on a daily basis. So this video was made intentionally for people who do not have APD, in hopes to help them understand on a much deeper level by experiencing those similar frustrations that someone might go through. So with that said, if you yourself have, auditory sensitivities, take that into account, take care of yourself. I don't want anyone to feel stressed in themselves. So let's play that. All right, and we won't be able to hear anything at first. And feel free to drop any thoughts you have into the chat as we go. Okay, so this is the part where you should be able to hear something. So we're going to stop right before the questions, just because we didn't tell you there would be a quiz at the end, but we are going to at least do the stimulation.
There was a boy named Jack and a girl named Jill. They were both brother and sister. They were both instructed by their parents to get some milk at the market since they ran out this morning when eating cereal. Jill put on her blue coat as Jack got his hat. Jack was always at the door. Eventually she decided, and off they began their adventure to the market. Along the little dog street in Hempstead, knowing whether they needed to be home soon before it got too dark out. Jack says, "Wow, Yeah, I could just grab one and eat it. They finally made it to their end for supper, and at the dinner parents about their small adventure to the market.
All right, so without even having to see those questions, I'm guessing that we won't be able to answer them. Because well, let's pause that. I thought we had done that. So when we're talking to our kiddos or a student that has auditory processing disorder, one of the biggest things, my son does this all the time, is he just goes, "What?" So a lot of times when we hear that "what," it's not that they didn't necessarily hear you, it's that they're still sifting through all of that auditory information that just came in, which is a lot of information, especially when we have, we heard some maybe rock music going on in the background. Maybe it's a song they like and they're distracted too. So there's a lot of different factors that can come in with processing that sensory information. So take a moment in the chat, or you can come off mute and think about how do sounds you enjoy impact you? And then think again about how the sounds you don't enjoy impact you. So as we kind of work through this in the chat, I'm thinking a lot of times talking is a really, really difficult sound to be able to process. So for me, when I'm feeling stressed and someone is talking at me, especially if they're asking questions of me, that is enough for me to have a sensory, moment where I need to pause.
Yeah, I
So.
think even for me, it's funny because I do it. I like to tap, but I'm so annoyed and I cannot focus if somebody's tapping around me that it's not my own tapping. And so just that little constant maybe beep or beat is enough for me not to be able to focus or to process what is going on.
Right. Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead a little bit so we can talk a little bit about some tips.
So some of the tips to help with auditory sensory issues is listening to books on tape. I'm gonna go on my soapbox because I absolutely love audiobooks. There's so many resources for you to have free audiobooks if you have a library card. There is a phone app called Hoopla and Libby, where as long as you have a current library card that you can download audiobooks or even ebooks on your phone or your tablet, any kind of electronic. And so it's super great. Then also there is the Free Library of Philadelphia, which is another resource. If you are a resident of PA, you get a free account and they have a ton of audiobooks and ebooks. And one thing I love about their resources is they have a lot of Spanish audiobooks and ebooks, which if you're bilingual or predominantly Spanish speaking or no Spanish speaking families, that's a great resource that is free. All you have to do is sign up and it's pretty quick. They'll email you and they'll give you a number and you just use that number in the apps. But those are really great ways to help. You can record lessons and allow the students to listen to them. Providing quiet areas is a super huge one. Sometimes the amount of noise that our students or our children are taking in is too much. And so having a place where they can literally just focus on one thing, or even providing headphones or earplugs, something that could help them minimize. I love a noise canceling earbud. There are places like Tech Owl who can help with assistive tech if that's something needed. Again, we'll give you all this information about resources, but quiet spaces are huge. And then using Ellen, you help me. I can never say this word. Thanks. Mnemonic devices like please excuse my dear Aunt Sally for trying to learn oh my gosh, it's not the paragon. Is it I'm not good at math either.
The order of operations, that's it. I've never done well in math, but here we are.
A long time since I've been in school and had to do that. So, but I remember it. Yeah. So just using things that can help them remember it. Also, if your child or student can handle it, maybe listening to nature sounds while they're studying is also known to help them intake stuff too. So just options for you to use.
And as we work through a lot of these tips, you're going to see that some tips are really aligned with kiddos that we'll talk about this a little bit later, that are more sensitive to sound. And then we'll also, some of these might apply more to kiddos who aren't receiving as much sensory input and are seeking more. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, and some of that like vocab that goes with that. But I think it's also really important to say, I was going to mention this earlier, but here we are, that when we're looking at the places in the brain where sound is processed, it's very, very close to our sound or to our pain receptors. So when we see a really sharp, harsh sound happening, especially around a kid who is, very sensory sensitive, they might immediately cover their ears as if they're in pain, and that's because they are. That is a physical pain sensation that they're feeling in that moment, because those areas of the brain are so close, they often kind of spill over. So you'll see a lot of those different types of recommendations as we go. So let's move on to the tactile system. All right, so we gather that sensory information from those receptors on our skin. So this is some of those more like light kind of sensations, like vibration, movement, pressure, temperature, pain. So those things that we're feeling right on the surface of our skin. That can, apply to some deeper pressure, but we'll talk about in a little bit how some of that deeper pressure can actually influence some of those other systems that we were talking about. So all right, so let's take a moment, and I see some people in the chat. Okay, for that, got it. Okay, so let's take a moment and talk a little bit about our tactile sensitivities. So, which textures do you find comforting, and what textures do you find stressful? And how have we maybe integrated some of those textures into our home and community settings? So one of my favorite things that I feel like it was a meme, now I just have incorporated it into my daily life, is that I'm sorry I was mean, my tag, I could feel my tag in my shirt. And I think that's the perfect way to capture that, navigating a social situation or any kind of situation gets so much more difficult when you have a constant tactile nag that's happening. So for me, tags are a huge one. So you'll see my entire closet, my son's closet, we don't have any tags on any of our clothes. We have no idea what size they are. We just try them on, and once they're too small, we chuck them. So it's something that many of us, I'm sure, can relate to. So a lot of times we might, gravitate towards certain types of fabrics, like a silk or a velvet or something that's smooth, where some kiddos, like if you even show them wool, they'll be like, no, thank you, hard pass. Or even denim, a lot of those like harder kind of, we're not, burlap isn't a, a fabric we're using in clothing often, but that would be another one that I would say is not very tactile friendly. So let's talk about some tips on how to incorporate that. Ooh, what is going on? Here we go.
Yes. So some tips to incorporate those is, I also love the picture that we have, which is a basically, well, as you can see, a hand with different textures. And so you would get your kid to touch and give them a opportunity to get familiar and also to see what they like and dislike. And so it's really good for data collection too, of like, okay, we know that Sam does not like anything rough. So these are good. So handling different textures, sandpaper. What are them? The sand tables are really big if the kids don't throw it all over the room. It's a good way for tactile sensory needs. Writing in cream or beans or rice, all of those things, they just offer activities and they teach with real life objects. So those are some of the ways that you can help with that sensory need.
Yeah, and a lot of this, you know, as we do get older, there's more opportunities to take the same types of input and make them either smaller, more portable, more age appropriate, whatever that looks like for that person. So for me, and we'll talk about this a lot on Thursday in our Building a Sensory Toolkit. So we'll talk about like some of the functions of different types of tools, and different ways to, you know, make the especially tactile tools, because I think that's one of the best strategies to be able to have. Like Tiara said, we're big putty people. If you ever see us at, you know, a transition fair or any outreach events, I usually have my big box of fidgets. Actually, it's in my car right now, so I don't have it. It's usually traveling with us. So we have a lot that mimics, you know, like a sandpaper. I love that kind of scratchy feel. There's even those like texture strips and things like that. So there's a lot of different options out there. Definitely join us on Thursday to talk a little bit more about like specific options, how to introduce them, and how to use them and things like that. So to answer the question in the chat, a lot of the strategies you see here are more like school-aged options or even early childhood options are there, they work. Some of these I would still, you know, do as much hands-on learning at any stage of life. I think sandpaper and like those texture strips are a great one because they're very discreet. You can have them in your pocket if you just need a moment and you don't really want to bring something out that's, you know, can be distracting to others or anything like that. So lots of options. All right. So the visual system. We have I want to make sure that I respect our time, so I might graze over a little bit of the nitty gritty. So we know that the images are received, you know, from the retina through the optic nerve to the brain. So we can kind of see, this is a very complicated diagram of like what's happening here. So we can see that this is coming in, it's flipping, and it's going around back to the brain. We're kind of having all of this looping back to the back of the brain in that primary visual cortex. So that's quite the obstacle course that our visual information is going through before we're even able to process it. So a lot of times those neural pathways, you know, might not be as clean as, you know, we'd like them to. So that's where a lot of that dysregulation in processing visual information can come in. So a lot of times we might see kids who are, you know, maybe getting their device really close to their eyes so that they can see the pixels within the screen, or you might see someone who is, you know, sensory seeking in a way where they might have like a spinner, a fidget spinner, and they're looking at the visual input of that. So we might also see this in the opposite, where if someone goes into a space where it is too bright, that is too much visual information, it hurts the eyes. You know, that's going to be really distressing as well. So we have, again, both sides of that experience, both sensory seeking and sensory coping. All right. So, Tiara, do you want to talk through with me a little bit about some of what our own is? If you want to drop in the chat, you're more than welcome to. For me, I know that I am a very visual, sensory seeking person. So I usually don't shy away from too much visual input. I love to see color. I love to see big patterns and things like that. It's very stimulating to me. You know, coming from the ADHD perspective of things, that's really connecting with me because it keeps me stimulated in that way. So I'm always looking for that sensory seeking. What about you, Tiara?
I agree. I'm very sensory seeking. I think even this photo that we have in our PowerPoint makes me want more sensory. But great that we found a cow in Marvel. Yeah, I love a lot of color. Uh, yeah, I'm very sensory seeking.
And this last one where it's saying like how can you make your home more visually pleasing, that's kind of adapted from a classroom. So I would even say that more like how can we make the spaces that student or child or person is interacting with more calming. So a lot of times people might be on the complete opposite side of this experience than Tiara and I, where a lot of posters on the wall or a lot of different colors is more stressful because it's just too much information to bring in. So I know there's lots of neuroscience out there about what colors are calming and all these different things. Yeah. That's right. So yeah, so there's a lot of different experiences that you can have with visual input. So
And Nina, I just wanted to address your question. We'll definitely talk about sounds in the next one. So we'll definitely answer your question. And Susan, thanks so much for the comment.
yeah, there and that's the thing, is a lot of it is you'll have, you know, sensory seeking in one of these and sensory coping in another. And that's so common, where, you know, for auditory, I'm the same exact way. Like I am very avoidant of things that are too auditory in nature. So I can definitely relate to that. And we can also share some recommendations for you know, different ear protection and things like that that do help soften sound and things like that.
So some tips for vision is I spy, just looking for things. I will say a disclaimer, there is a fine line between visually pleasing and interesting over being and like being overstimulated of the vision system or vision system. So chances are not all students find the same things visually pleasing, which is fair. We don't find the same things pretty or not. So something to keep in mind. Some other things you can use are puzzles. I love the lava lamp or the oil dripping system as just a way to look at something and to calm and to regulate. And also just identifying objects in a book or a poster can be helpful.
Mhm. I mean, and there's really old research at this point that shows that, especially with like eye gouging and things like that, visual stimulation helps every time. You know, if we have students that are, you know, manipulating their physical eye space because of sensory dysregulation, we see that a lot of times when we introduce, you know, like these toys that are very visually engaging, we see that reduction in, you know, the harm that can be done with like manipulating the physical eye space.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Another,
and
oh, sorry, go
go
ahead.
for it.
Another device is, I don't know if you guys have seen the mason jars and they put water and glitter and you seal it and you shake it and you can watch it and it's a common effect, just paying attention to the glitter dissipate in the water and move around. It's really cool.
To speak to in the chat, so this person said, I am a sensory seeker tactile, but not an auditory. I tend to accidentally block out sounds if things pop up. My children are also a combination. Sometimes they seek, some they avoid, or some things they seek, some they avoid. My daughter hates slime, but will get lost putting her hands in sand or rice. So I find that you really have to trial every tool. And when we talk on Thursday, we'll give you some tools for how to collect data on that change of like how that input affected that kid or person or whoever, whether it was calming, whether it was alerting, what effect did that have. But yeah, so there's a lot of different, it's really a choose your own adventure kind of thing. So every kiddo is going to be different. Me, I'm like your child. I love crunchy textures. I don't like sticky textures. So everyone's a little bit different in that way.
Also, I love the comment. It says, I noticed over time more exposure in small amounts builds tolerance for my son. True, like exposure therapy, it'll help build over time. So maybe they won't like it now, but maybe they'll be able to deal with it in the future as we expose them to the different textures or sounds or any of the sensory things.
Yeah, and that small amount really does help because where every time the brain experiences that input and realizes that it's safe through the process, we're helping write that neural pathway of this not being a danger, and not needing the anxiety response that a lot of times comes with that dysregulation. So, and that kind of leads perfectly into the olfactory system. So the olfactory system is highly complex, and it's discriminating between many different orders, which in turn helps humans understand which smells are strong, faint, pleasurable, foul, and even dangerous. And as we know, we all have different opinions on which ones fall into which category. So although the system plays an important role in our ability to sense smell, it is also closely related to our limbic system. So our limbic system is responsible for emotions, behavior, and memory, as well as our sense of taste, and that helps create all the flavors that we taste in the food we consume. And I don't know about you, but sorry, what was that? I know that for me, food is the life force of daily experience. Where food is what keeps us going, what fuels us, and it is a non-negotiable part of the human experience. So a functioning olfactory system assists children in identifying good smells, like smells that are safe, pleasant, connected with positive emotions, from bad smells. So things that are unpleasant, displeasing, or reminders of a negative experience. So for children with an over-responsive olfactory system, smells can be a constant source of anxiety. So not only are some odors more intense, but associations made between the sense and the emotions they experience can become more extreme for them. So this is something that's really, really important to remember for any of the systems, but especially our smell, we know is tied with memories very, very deeply.
I will say, my grandma wore white diamonds. It's not as popular of a perfume now, but she passed when I was in high school, and my mom inherited some of her clothes. And so one day I was in her closet looking for something, and the smell hit me, and I instantly cried. And so now, if I smell a woman wearing white diamonds, which again is not very often because it's not as popular anymore, it instantly brings tears to my eyes because it just reminds me of my grandma. So it's a huge smell thing.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because sometimes, like I have memory issues because I have a traumatic brain injury, so I don't remember many things. But I'll notice that sometimes my smell is the thing that works the best. So I'll be like, I remember this smell. I don't remember anything about it, but I remember the smell. So it can really be triggering in both good and bad ways.
Some tips we have is making the environment as fragrance free as possible, which I know is hard because I'm a perfume girly. I love to smell nice, but sometimes your perfume can be overwhelming to your students or your children. And so just something to think about. You can also ask, let's say we're in a classroom setting, you can also ask the cleaning staff to use fragrance-free cleaning products or use unperfumed things or toiletries in your rooms. You can also keep students or situate or sitting away from the trash bin, which is another thing known to produce strong odors. And also, again, just being aware what perfumes you're wearing, or even I know we have like scented markers and stuff that can also trigger unbalance or unregulation. So just being aware of what your students are doing. Also, we love windows. Sometimes we don't have them. I personally love a fan blowing because I feel that it keeps the room ventilated and the air moving. That's a way to help, and also allowing them to sit by the window is, or by an open window, is good. And also teaching students appropriate coping strategies, as in covering your nose with a tissue, that might help. Even telling a person who has a smell that is unpleasing in a nice way that they don't care for the smell or it's unpleasant, or using visual cues could help. You can also try providing the students with the scent that they prefer. They can use a mask maybe sprayed with the scent that they like to help with a strategy for smelling unpleasant odors that they might encounter throughout the day.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember here that it's again, you have to always be trialing things and what effect they have. A lot of times we think like, oh, lavender is so relaxing. Some kids might be really triggered by a lavender. So we
Yeah.
have to really think about, what's the effect? What's the observed effect that this is having? And then making adjustments accordingly. Because a lot of times we see like aromatherapy or things like that, which is sometimes has the opposite effect than intended. So. I'm going to skip this next one just so we can get through everything with enough time. All right, so we have the gustatory system. So the gustatory system, or our sense of taste, allows us to recognize those 5 basic taste sensations. So sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, which I'm still trying to figure out exactly what umami is, but that's for another day.
It's
So,
earthy.
it's
Earthy.
earthy. You know
Yeah.
what? I've never heard it described that way. I like that. Okay. I feel like I need to circle back to this umami conversation at some point. But for now, the sense is meant to keep us safe from ingesting things that are toxic or spoiled or inedible. So it plays a really important role in eating and drinking, but is, obviously not the only sense that allows us to perceive flavor. So it would be very difficult to identify foods that we eat without additionally relying on texture, temperature, sense of smell, all those different things. I know I always laugh at the guy who, what's his name, that always talks about mouth feel. It's like a whole thing when he talks about food, it's all about mouth feel. And I'm like, I get you, dude. I hear you. um, but yeah, so the need for adequate oral input may cause a child or anyone to constantly be putting inedible objects into their mouth. So we see this a lot, and this is at any age. So we see that from a young child who might be kind of sucking on their shirt collar, which I swear my son's first. I mean, every once in a while, still you can see it all like damp and wrinkled from him just sucking on his shirt. And we even see this at in our offices sometimes, where someone's like sitting there chewing on a pen, or they like even smoking. All of these things are oral, it's sensation seeking. So we can remind them till the cows come home to not suck on their shirt, but at the end of the day it's a sensory need. So we might need to supplement that in some ways to help them figure out a way to get that sensory input. And but on the other end of that, we have some kiddos who are very avoidant of that sensory input. So it might mean that child only eats one food, 2 types of food. And that might be that safe space, because anything that is flavorful is just too much sensory input. So sometimes that blandness really works in kiddos' favor. So a lot to take in that gustatory system. All right. So I'm going to skip this since we're running a little low on time. So we'll get caught up.
But I'm gonna come in with the tips.
Yeah.
Just to remind that we all have different dislikes and likes. And so, and also our preference changes as we grow. So trying to explore different things is going to be the most beneficial, even if they're resistant. So some things that you can do are taste tests with sweet, savory, sour, salty, comparing textures, whether it's hard. I cannot do okra because it's slimy. And so just finding out things that they like and don't like. One great thing is the jelly bee or jelly belly jelly beans. That's a great way. It might be traumatic for them, but that's a great way to
Don't do
test
Fruity
different
Box.
flavors. I don't know if you guys have ever played the Bean Boozle. It really could be traumatic because they can get one like boogers, which again, it's just we'll chalk it up to experience, but that's a really good way to test different things and a really fun way to test different things. Also to remember to offer them a variety of different foods and also to encourage to try new foods, even if they take one bite. Them having that experience and discovering what they do like and don't like is always beneficial when trying to figure out sensory tips to help.
All right. So proprioceptive systems. So um when when we're talking about the proprioceptive system, we're talking about where we are in space. So our location, our position within that location, our orientation to other things in that space, and also the movements that we're engaging in. So there's a lot that really goes into, that what that proprioceptive system is giving. Sorry, my notes disappeared on this part, but we're just gonna go with it. All right, so a lot of times you might see in proprioceptive, when we're talking about proprioceptive systems, that sometimes an occupational therapist might talk a lot about the midline. So a lot of times we see different exercises that are about crossing, where we might be using the right side of our body to interact with something on the left side of our body. And we might be using the left side of our body, like hand, foot, even eye gaze, to interact with things on the right side of our body. So what that does is it helps integrate both sides of the body, so that the proprioceptive system is balanced and it's working the way it should be. Let me see. I'm going to pass this to you for a moment, Tiara, so that you can talk a little bit about tips so I can bring my actual notes back up so I didn't miss anything.
Gotcha. So some things that yoga is very aware of your body, what you're doing, how you're placing it. Wall push-ups, you can take your child and let's say they're really active and need some release, you can put them up against the wall and have them do push-ups. Lifting, pulling, pushing heavy things. So we have given students tote bags full of books and let them carry it around the classroom or the room for a little while, which will help with that sensory need. Wiping desks, you can put it to work, wiping desks and tables, and also jumping or running in place or playing with clay or slime or putty. All of those things help motivate and get that sensory need toward it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so to get into the proprioceptive system a little bit, we know that that's a sense of body awareness. And the other thing is it detects and controls force and pressure. So a lot of times when you receive, treatment from an OT for, proprioceptive integration, you might hear something sometimes about like pressure on the joints and, and different ways to apply pressure so that it actually creates that calming effect, because the proprioceptive system has a really important regulatory role in the sensory processing. So it really helps in controlling the response to sensory stimuli. So a lot of times that input is so calming for someone who might be easily overwhelmed by that stimulation. So a lot of students or people in our lives might seek that input, you know, that pressure or even like a hug or things like that, because that is helping balance that system out for them. And we on Thursday, we'll talk about a lot of different strategies for different activities and things to put in toolkits to get that like deep pressure, so that it gives that relief for that system to be more regulated and to process that input. All right, so that goes right in hand with the vestibular system. So that detects that movement and gravitational pull. So it provides that information regarding the position of our head in space and the acceleration and deceleration of movement. So it's the first sensory system to fully develop in utero and is located in the inner ear. So I said we would come back to the inner ear eventually, and here we are. So the vestibular system has a lot of really strong neurological connections in the brain and is a major organizer in the varied sensory input that we receive. So the system is considered the most influential sensory system and has tremendous impact on our ability to function every day. So directly or indirectly, the vestibular system influences everything we do. So it is that unifying system in the brain that modifies and coordinates all that information from all the other symptoms. And it kind of is, it's a traffic cop of sorts. So it tells each sensation where and when it should stop or go. So it's kind of like that guy in the Richard Scarry book who's in the middle on the platform telling each car which way to go. So that's, you know, the vestibular system has a really important effect in that way. So I'm going to cruise through a little bit since we're pretty much at the end of our time. So we'll talk a little bit more about tips and tools on Thursday when we talk about how to build a sensory toolkit. So we'll save that for then. I did want to talk quickly about the interoception system, if that's okay. So it is our system that provides all that information about the internal conditions of our body and how we're feeling on the inside. So things like a growling stomach, meaning we're hungry, or dry mouth and a racing heart means we're nervous. So awareness of these body sensations helps us to experience that much needed information, so to help us process emotions. So it helps us manage the way we feel, and it prompts us to take action on those body signals, which is the most important part. So we might notice like shivering muscles or goosebumps, so that we have to put on a jacket because we're feeling cold. Or we might be aware of like a tight chest, you know, saying that we need to do some deep breaths to calm ourselves down. So these are really, really, really important for self-regulation. And a lot of times this is where we see the most like functional skills that are taught around this sense. So a lot of times we'll have like social stories or things like that to talk about, you know, how to react to these different types of sensations. Oops, I took a little one off that. And again, we'll talk about these more on Thursday when we talk tools and toolkit and all that good stuff. All right, so we have 3 minutes here. Do you mind if I power through? All right, love it. Okay, so sensory processing disorder is a neurological condition that interferes with the body's ability to receive messages from the senses and to convert them into appropriate motor and behavioral responses. So it's all about not being able to effectively receive and respond to that information. So, you know, when the body is unable to organize it, it can be really disorienting. It can cause a lot of anxiety, and it can cause a person to go into a crisis situation, or the beginning of one. So it inhibits a person's ability to filter out that unimportant information. So information that's coming in that doesn't change, you know, that's not accurate to say that, so I'm not even going to say it. So it inhibits that ability for unimportant information, like background music in a busy cafe, that might make them feel a little overwhelmed or overstimulated. So next, we usually watch Carly. We have maybe a couple slides left after this. Do we want to take a couple extra minutes and go over 12, or do?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
We are recording it as well, so if anybody has to hard stop it at 12, we will be sending the recording after. I
Okay.
just want to allow like a few minutes for some question and answer too. So
Absolutely.
great.
So we can share this video so that you can watch it at your, leisure. This is a great way to kind of look into what the experience of, extreme sensory dysregulation is like. And throughout the movie or throughout the video, you'll see that as her choice is less honored, her sensory dysregulation also continues to rise. So you can see that there's a direct correlation between the resilience to sensory input and the stress that the social stress that she's going throughout the movie. You can see them climb together. So we'll pop this in the chat then, so that you can see this at your leisure. But it's gonna autoplay, so let's just keep going. So this is something I wanted to make sure that we talk about. Is we talked about this a lot as we went, but these are really important distinguishing terms of hypersensitivity versus hyposensitivity. So our hypersensitivity means that we're really, really avoidant of that sensory input. It's too much for us. It's really stressful and overwhelming. So we might be fearful of certain sensory input. And we might avoid it. There's that hypersensitivity to the input. Then we have our hyposensitivity, which is where we are not receiving as much of that sensory information, and we're seeking it out. So we're sensory seeking. So we might be touching people a lot. We might be touching textures. We might be doing a lot of like where you might be over your ears, creating like an auditory kind of pulse. We might be doing some of that like visual stimming and stimulation to give ourselves that input. So we have hyper, which is very sensitive to, where we might be a little avoidant of those sensory inputs, and hyposensitive, which is where we're seeking more because we are not getting the full experience of those senses. Okay. Let's
go with the strategies.
Right. So let's do some strategies. Do you want to go with it, Tiara?
Sure.
All right.
Just so you have an idea, we skipped through the behaviors, but some behaviors are stumping their feet, rolling their body on the floor along the wall, biting their fingers. But we can send all of these other things, or all these, we'll send the PowerPoint. But some coping strategies we have, we have our, first of all, we need to remember that it helps them stay focused on the task. It supports them when they're frustrated. It keeps them self-regulated. It calms their body movements, and it helps them feel in control. So all of the tips that we shared after the explanation of each sensory system are great coping strategies to help do all of those things that we said would help. Some common disabilities that have sensory processing issues are autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, intellectual and developmental disabilities, or you can not even have a diagnosis at all and still experience some of these things. And so when we talk on Thursday, we'll go into a very detailed list and explanation of some things that we would incorporate in our sensory toolkit. Eleni, did you have anything or any questions?
Yeah, I think it's so important. Like, we're all at this point probably very familiar with a lot of these different, disabilities that are very sensory in nature. But I think one thing that I've learned, especially in the classroom, working around, neurotypical coworkers, is that we all have sensory needs, regardless of who we are. It's just a matter of whether we want to accept, acknowledge, and respect them. We all have our limitations for senses, or what we can sense, and the impact that it has on us. So, it's really important that this is a really universally experienced you know, dysfunction in a lot of ways, of course, we see a lot of varying levels of how much this can impact our daily life. So. All right, so I know that was a lot of information very quickly, but let's talk a little bit. Let's do, if you have any questions, feel free to come off chat, or you can drop them, or come off mute, or you can drop them in the chat.
Thanks. This was great. Lots of wonderful information. Thank you for joining us today. I have a quick question that came up. How you often see, say in an IEP meeting or the school personnel, that they'll say they have the opportunity to go to the sensory room or use sensory tools if they're feeling agitated. But a lot of times that's already too late. So, you know, you have to watch for the signs, or you just have to build it into their day, even if they don't really look like they need it. It will help prevent that. So do you have any tips on like encouraging that understanding? Because I think that people, like you said, I think people just aren't as familiar or knowledgeable about this sensory integration. So they think it can't be reactive. It's sort of, always be reactive. It sort of has to be like a proactive approach. And that's what I think sometimes there's a disconnect there.
Sure. Yeah, sending a kiddo to the sensory room when they're melting down is not going to help.
Right.
Guaranteed.
But you still see that. That's still
right.
common.
And that's a lot of times the go-to. I suggest advocating for, sensory breaks, a sensory diet, which we'll talk a little bit more on Thursday of what that can look like, and that these kiddos really need regular input so that, like we were saying, that we build that resilience over time, and then we learn to use those tools so that kids can really identify when they're maybe not getting heightened, but feeling like their sensory system is either underwhelmed or maybe getting overwhelmed, so that we can start to they can start to self-identify earlier on, and be able to use those tools. But I think the best way is to plan times to go to the sensory room. If you have access to one, make it a part of their day.
Yeah.
So build it into their day. It's just part of their normal routine. Right.
Yep.
And once you've identified what area is the struggle for them too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you provide something proprioceptive when really the issue is vestibular, then, or if they're hypo versus hyper.
Yeah, and a lot of times, especially in the school system, there isn't always, a lot of that, guidance in terms of what tools work for what. So that's a big thing that we're going to be talking on Thursday, is like how to go through, like even a fidget discovery, any kind of tool discovery, like what is going to work for this kid? How are we going to teach, this kiddo that this is a tool, not a toy, which is a big thing that we hear in classrooms, that, students don't have access to things because they're playing with them or they're using it as a toy. So that's all a really important part of the process of not just introducing, but also how to build it into their day, the context in which they're, having access to it, and a lot of those different factors.
Great. Well, that brings us to hopefully most of you can join us on Thursday for the second part of this, where we'll talk about building the sensory toolkit and how to use that with your student or your child or your, whoever you provide services for. And if, does anybody else want to unmute and ask a question? We do have some time here. And I can stop the recording now too.